Curse of Bell's Rectory. From Baffling Mysteries number 14, March 1953, Dare to disturb the treasure, dare to face the curse. Kevin Clyde stepped off the noon train at the small English village. He was conscious of the curious stares of the small group of villagers hanging around the station gossiping, but he knew what his purpose here was, and their glances didn't bother him. He strode purposefully toward the center of the main street until he found the shop he was looking for. As he entered, and the bell clanged his arrival, the merchant looked up. "Good day, sir," he said cheerfully. "What can I do for you?" Briefly, Clyde outlined his needs, and as he did so, the dealer's eyes narrowed with curiosity. But he looked again at Kevin Clyde, and something about the other's face forbade his questioning. Slowly, he pulled the merchandise forward and piled it on the counter: a stout rope, a shovel, a gunny sack, and the pumping equipment his customer wished to rent. The suspicion was in the merchant's mind as to what his strange customer was up to, and then as the other paid, he caught a glimpse of the small volume his customer carried. "Good Lord, Mar," the dealer exclaimed. "You're not going after the treasure of Bell's Rectory. There's a curse upon it, and those who try to seek it." Kevin Clyde's face set in anger. He had hoped to carry out his project in secrecy, but he saw that it was impossible in this tiny village. "I'll ask you to mind your own business," he snapped as he pushed his money across the counter. "Give me my change, and I'll say good day." Silently, the dealer complied, and Kevin Clyde trode out of the store with his purchases. Once outside, Kevin Clyde easily located the spires of the ancient rectory, and he headed toward his destination. As he walked toward Bell's Rectory, he thought again what luck it had been that he'd stopped at the small bookstand in London to waste an hour between trains. He'd come across the old, mildewed account of Bell's Rectory, and he had been particularly struck by the similarity between his name-pad, that of the ancient bandit the book told about. Kevin Clyde had been a highway bandit who'd sought refuge in Bell's Rectory. The deacon there had granted him sanctuary, but, with a thief's ingratitude, Karen couldn't bear to leave without taking the plates of silver he'd seen in the rectory. One night he'd decayed the deacon up to the turret of the church, and then had flung him from the tower. Clyde then had packed the silver and fled, but as he'd raced across the grounds from the deserted tower, he had heard the unaccountable ominous ring of the church bells alerting the countryside. From their homes in the village, people had hurried toward the rectory, and those arriving first had seen Clyde, consumed by fear, stumble and fall with his ill-gotten treasure into the well upon the grounds. Searchers 100 years before had never recovered Clyde's body or the treasure. Then all efforts to do so stopped as generations passed, and the legend grew that the ghost of the murdered deacon wandered around the grounds, seeking vengeance on all those who dared disturb the treasure. But Kevin Clyde was a fearless man, and somewhat low on funds. He'd come here determined, and no legend would keep him from his goal. Now Kevin Clyde stood beside the well, watching the pump expel the sluggish water. He became excited as sludge and slime came up, indicating the well was nearly dry. As the last water was drained away, the pump stopped suddenly, and there was no sound in the afternoon quiet. Kevin bent over, trying to peer downward into the well's dark depths. As he did so, for a moment, a chill wind seemed to blow over him, eclipsing the warmth of the sun and making the day seem suddenly gloomy and foreboding. The cold seemed to pierce his bones. But then the feeling passed, as though some unseen presence had gone on its way, and it seemed to Clyde that he must have imagined it. Quickly, he threw the rope he'd purchased over the side of the well. Carefully, he knotted the end to the edge of the well where a ledge was formed. Then, taking the shovel with him, he swung himself over the edge. As Kevin climbed down, the stench of the slime-covered walls came to him. Once, halfway in his descent, he seemed to sense the presence of someone up above, and he glanced back. For a moment it seemed to him that against the sky, bending over the well and peering down at him, was a man's head. The skin stretched tightly over the bony skull, with eyes gleaming with some mad desire. "I say," Kevin called, "who's there? What is it you want?" But only his voice echoed back from the stone walls. There was no other reply. The head seemed to vanish even as he watched, and Kevin shivered with some nameless dread. The whole adventure was causing him to imagine things, he finally decided. Must be more careful, he muttered. Now I'm talking to ghosts! At last the bottom of the well was reached, and he stepped onto the oozing slime. It shifted slightly under his weight, but it seemed firm enough to hold him. He estimated that the passing decades would have forced the bandit's body and the treasure somewhat deeply into the well bottom, and he started digging. He had not turned over many shovelfuls of the sticky mud when he discovered that bits of rotted cloth were coming free. Elated by this evidence, he dug faster, and soon his shovel struck something hard. Quickly, Kevin uncovered the object and picked it up. It was round and hard, and he switched on his flashlight to see what it was. Then a shudder ran through him. In the reflected glow, he saw he was holding the skull of the ancient murderer, the bone gleaming whitely beneath the mud sticking to it. And then, from the top of the well, a dribble of maniacal laughter seemed to drift down to him. Yet when Kevin gazed skyward again, he could see nothing. Despite his fear, Kevin resumed digging. At least, he thought, this proves the legend is true. It was not long after that the silver plates came to the surface. They, too, were coated with mud and tarnished from their resting place, but their very weight was enough to indicate their value. Another hour passed, and the mound of silver plates now represented a sizable fortune. There seemed nothing else to dig for. Averting his eyes from the heap of human bones that had accompanied the treasure, Kevin packed the silver into the sack he'd brought along. Then, dragging its weight behind him, he started the long climb up out of the well. It was close to dusk when Kevin stepped onto the grounds. Long shadows were playing across the neglected shrubbery, and he stumbled as he made his way back to the path. Kevin Clyde had hurried just a little way down the path when he came upon the small graveyard he had to pass. He was halfway through it when a figure rose to greet him. It loomed suddenly, dressed in somber clothes of some other age, from behind a tombstone. And even as Kevin Clyde stared horrifiedly into those burning, tormented eyes, he knew he had been stopped at the grave of the murdered deacon. "Back! Back!" the creature whispered menacingly to him, and against his will, Kevin Clyde retreated, stumbling, the sack of silver plates making difficult his steps. The specter paced toward him relentlessly, forcing him ever backward, until with a cry that was torn from his throat, Kevin Clyde turned and fled blindly toward Bell's Rectory, dragging the sack behind him. As he ran, he felt the presence of the evil spirit behind him. The wind in the night had risen to a screaming sound, and sudden rain pelted his back. But above the storm, he heard the other's robes flapping as he followed. Into Bell's Rectory, and up the worn, dust-laden stone steps leading to the tower, Kevin raced in his mad flight, with only cobwebs barring his way, and the creature from the graveyard followed behind him quickly. Gasping, Kevin Clyde reached the church tower. As he pushed open the door that led out to the tower, the bells in front of him started pealing madly, deafeningly, although no human hand was ringing them. Kevin Clyde could go no further. His back to the stone ledge of the tower, he turned to face the specter. The bells rang loudly in his ears as the awful creature closed in on him. Letting go of his treasure, he grappled madly with the thing of rotted flesh and cloth, but then he felt himself lifted with some maniacal force and flung from the church tower. Kevin Clyde gave one last tortured scream as he plummeted downward, and then he knew no more. It was the ringing of the bells that alerted the townspeople. They came out of their houses and huddled, listening to the awesome sound filling the night. The rain had stopped, and the moon was out. A few claimed that as they watched, for a moment outlined against the moonlight was some vague, formless creature, dragging a sack which he dropped down the old well before he disappeared. But no one dared climb the hill to Bell's Rectory that night. The next morning, the searchers found Kevin Clyde. He was lying in a broken heap upon the ground beneath the tower. At first, the scoffers thought that in a moment of madness, the stranger had flung himself from the tower. But then they found in his hand a rotted bit of cloth, such as would belong to a collar of some ancient garment. Then, when they entered the rectory, in the disturbed dust, they saw the clues of Kevin Clyde's mad flight and of the thing that was chasing him. Up to the tower, 2 sets of footprints led, but there was just one set of the odd footprints coming down. There was no sign of the treasure. The searchers followed the prints in the rain-soaked earth, where they led to the well, and then to the graveyard and to the plot, where legend said the murdered deacon was buried. But search as they would, the prints ended there, as if the deacon had returned to his rest. They knew then that the curse of Bell's Rectory indeed was true, and that the deacon's ghost had had his revenge. The end.
The preceding thrilling story has presented for your enjoyment. This classic work is now in the public domain, making it freely available to be shared and appreciated by all. Some elements may appear outdated or insensitive by today's standards, but we present this work in its original form to preserve its historical context and literary significance. Sit back, relax, and indulge in this timeless tale. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. Every bit helps this channel grow. Thank you.